All financial support for this podcast comes from my patrons on patreon.com. If you'd like to join in with the patrons, please check out patreon.com/DarwinGross. That's DarwinGrosse. Now enjoy the podcast. Okay, today I have the great opportunity to speak to somebody I've kind of known for a long time. We used to bump into each other in mailing lists back in the day, but whose work I've been a follower of for a long time. Really respect so many of the different things that he does, and so I'm really excited to be able to present Taylor Deupree. Hey man, how's it going?
Thanks, Darwin. Thank you.
Yeah, why don't we start off by having you talk a little bit about what you've been up to lately?
As in the past year?
Yeah.
I mean, for about 10 years now, maybe a touch less, I've really been concentrating on my job as a mastering engineer. I mean, not more so than music or the label or anything, but it's since I stopped being a freelance graphic designer. I was working at a small design company in New York City for a while and kind of got into mastering about 10 years ago. And it's really taken off. I mean, and it's, absolutely a full-time job now, and I love it. So that's really been it's my bread and butter, and it takes a lot of time, and It does take time away from my own music writing, but I'm not one to release, 5 albums a year or something. So it's not that big of a deal. I still find the time. I just have to work a little harder to find the time to do my own stuff, and certainly spending all day in the studio working on other people's music. By the time the evening rolls around, I kind of want to get out of here. So I do need to work hard at carving out the time for myself. But I've been I think plenty prolific on the releasing front over the last couple years. I guess it's been a couple years since a solo album has come out. I had the Somi album on 12K, which I don't remember the years of these things. I think that might have been 2019 or 2018. I mean, I release a solo album every couple of years, sort of, is about my thing. And I actually have one coming out shortly on the Belgian label called Deupree. And I'm really excited about that. It's my first solo vinyl release. They do a lot of cassettes on the label. I really love the output of the label and sent them a couple tracks earlier last year. And it's coming out, I think now it's a little bit at the mercy of the vinyl production gods. It was slated for February or so, but now I think it's going to be more March, April.
Okay.
And I have an album and a half of other material ready for 12K, but kind of been going back and forth on it a bit.
Sure.
So not quite ready. But.
When did you release the Canoe album? That was last year, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was pretty recently. I forgot what the release. I think that was.
It's like October, right? It says October 13th, 2020.
Okay.
So that's pretty recent, actually.
Yeah, that's pretty recent. I mean, that's more of I don't really call that an album, but I guess it is. I mean, it's a 20-minute piece.
Right.
Single song, 20-minute piece. And when I complete something and turn in the final work, then I kind of lose track of when the actual release is.
Sure.
Then it's kind of up to the label or whatever. But yeah, that was something that I'd worked on throughout most of the year, and a couple of pieces for that series, long form editions, which is an Australian imprint.
Mm-hmm.
Had a couple pieces going and finally settled on that.
It was really cool. I actually really was kind of grooving on that. I actually used like the Bandcamp app on my phone, and it was just kind of a constant companion here over the last few days. So I really did appreciate that. Now you talk about the mastering and that being kind of a full time. It kind of takes over your life. I do notice your name as mastering engineer on an awful lot of work that comes out. When did you first start doing mastering?
Actually, I can't necessarily call it full mastering, but back in the 90s when I worked for Instinct Records as their art director, I was also recording on the label, and it's a small company. They knew that I obviously was doing music and had studio stuff, and they'd release a lot of compilations.
Okay.
and someone needed to compile those compilations. And I said, I'll do it. So, and they'd pay me a little on the side, apart from my design gig. And it was basically just compiling stuff from a bunch of other CDs, but then leveling it. And that was
Right.
the kind of main thing is getting just consistent levels. And occasionally I do like an EQ tweak, if something was like overly bright next to something else or whatever. But, very rudimentary stuff, but important, leveling consistent leveling is an important part of the mastering process,
Especially for a compilation, because that
and
can be all over the
especially for a
place. Yeah.
compilation. It's yeah, and so that was kind of my first taste of it, and that was probably 94, 95.
Okay.
And after I left Instinct and moved up here out of the city, I mean, I'd been, increasingly interested in, I'm always interested in gear and equipment. And as I get older and my career goes onward, I can get interested in higher end equipment. And it kind of dawned on me at one point that so much of the music that we make and, our kind of our extended circle of experimental ambient music, whatever you want to call it, is produced in the bedroom. And back when I started, it was a lot of laptops and maybe not the greatest recording environments. And I said, hey, maybe I can do something about this. Maybe
Right.
there's something I can do because the sounds are so important to our genre of music. It's not, the sounds are everything. There's usually no lyrics or hooks or things like that. It's all about the sounds and the textures. So my thinking was that, let me see what I can do for the artists on 12K or friends to try to elevate these mixes that were done in, less than ideal situations on less than ideal equipment, and maybe just give them a little polish and get them running through some nice uh, outboard equipment and stuff. And that's what kind of led to it. Just kind of wanting to work on, especially my label stuff, but friends stuff, and just kind of see if I can get it to the next level, whatever that means. And it just kind of snowballed from there into doing it for more and more people, and eventually hiring an acoustic designer to design a studio, and
It was all downhill from there, right?
yeah, all downhill from there. Um, but I always thought I would be good at it because I love, it's a combination of art and technology,
Hmm.
and both things that I really enjoy. It is a very technical job, and I love the technical aspect of it and the gear and the hows and the whys. And I think people trusted me with, so many years and a couple decades of experience in music and especially this kind of genre.
Right.
Um, that it helped, because I take it very, I don't care who sends me a song, if it's a established artist or someone on their first release. I treat every mastering job equally. My name's on these things. I don't,
Yeah.
no one gets a special treatment that someone else doesn't get. So yeah, I love doing it. It's just, and it's really over the last 2 or 3 years, it's become just really nonstop.
Interesting. Interesting. Now, there's a couple of things there I want to come back to, but before we go further, one of the kind of stock things I do in my podcast is I talk to people about how they got to be the artists, makers, creators, developers, whatever, whoever I'm talking to, how they got to
Hmm.
be what they are. And you actually have a very kind of curious thing. You've dropped some nuggets here, art background, but also one of being an artist. And you actually, I have actually a number of questions about some of the collaborations that you worked on because
Hmm.
you especially were known for doing some pretty amazing collaborations. You have the label, all of this stuff. Where are you coming from that this was kind of like a natural direction for you to go? What was your upbringing like? How did you first get into music? Stuff like that.
Your first question there, like, where's this all coming from? I think it's pretty much coming from my parents, who were both very independent, really a whole family of independent thinkers and self motivated, self employed. I never once saw my dad put on a suit and go to work. He always worked for himself. He had a landscaping business. He was an antique dealer. He made his own professional life, and a very good one. He was very successful. So for me, growing up as a kid, it just seemed, I mean, looking back on it now, maybe it just seemed like what you do. I mean, my parents weren't putting on a suit and going out at 9 in the morning, getting home at 5.
Right.
They were running around like crazy, managing their own thing, and with no set schedule and no, I mean, that's the way my life is. And we have a lot of artists in our family, art lovers, music lovers. I mean, it's generally a pretty somewhat non-traditional family. I don't know if there's traditional family, but art was always encouraged in our family. And my dad got me into photography at a young age
Hmm.
because he always had cameras around the house and he was a photography lover. My cousins, when I was 13 or 14, got me into new wave music. And that was kind of the end, the beginning. That was it. I mean, early, I grew up listening to the Beatles and Kiss when I was
Right.
much younger. But as soon as I heard synth pop, when I was 15, I said, that's what I want to do. I want to do that. I was playing drums in the school band, and I had a drum kit. I sold my drum kit in my comic book collection and bought my first synth. And
That's like the true definition of growing up right there.
yeah, you got to sell your comic collection for something,
That's
you know.
right.
Now I'm regretting it because I remember some of the issues that were in there and looking at the prices of them now.
Yikes.
But I was really taken by these, one or two man bands,
Right.
Howard Jones. And I mean, the early first stuff I listened to was fairly lightweight, Howard Jones and Duran Duran and those. And that quickly moved into more esoteric things and industrial and, things like that. But seeing these, one or two man bands, and I had my best friend in high school had just gotten a synthesizer too. And we got together on day one and just, it's 1985, and started writing music and recording it on a boombox, and I'd never stopped.
Yeah.
I still have all those tapes. I have
Oh, really?
all the cassettes from 1985 labeled with the day we wrote the song. We'd write 15 songs in a weekend. We had two synths and a drum machine or whatever, and we'd.
You never found yourself having to recycle those cassettes? That was my problem, is that I was just like, oh, geez, I ran out of cassettes. I better just going to overwrite this one. You end up
Yeah, I
like
mean,
losing some good stuff that way.
I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure we lost some good stuff, but but really, when that was it. It's like when I was 15, that's what I wanted to do. I said I'm
Right.
going to be a musician, and my parents were totally supportive. Their only stipulation was that I have to go to college. I have to get college experience, college education,
Mm-hmm.
something to fall back on. And I was totally fine with that. I was looking forward to college, but I only wanted to go to one place, and that was New York City. And I did not want to study music at all. I didn't want anyone to teach me how to write music.
I was going to ask, why wouldn't you have wanted to pursue music?
In hindsight, I kind of wish I did. Maybe. I mean, music to me was so personal, and so I looked at Berklee College of Music,
Mm-hmm.
and so many of the music colleges were performance based. Berkeley's very much performance based,
Yeah, very much.
but I didn't want to go through 4 years of like doing piano recitals, or maybe I just didn't think that you could get a degree in weird music. You know, maybe now you can, but
Yeah.
it's just,
Yeah.
and it was just so personal. It's like I don't want anyone to teach me how to do this. This is my passion. This is
Sure.
something I want to figure out myself. So I went to school for photography at NYU, and I loved photography, and I still do. So that's my college degree. But every waking moment during college, I was in my dorm or apartment writing music. Since that day in 1985, just like reading Keyboard magazine, and the learning hasn't stopped.
Right.
Completely self-taught on everything, just devouring magazines and then websites and music forums. And
What was your first release? Was it
my
under the
my very first
prototype stuff,
release,
or?
yeah, was I actually had my very first release was a single track. If you remember the label Rhino Records,
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
which was a big, and I don't Rhino was, I forgot what their thing was, but they weren't I don't know if they were a major or part of a major, but maybe they did a lot of um,
I think they did a ton of reissue things and
reissues.
stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
reissues. But
right.
they had some. I have the CD downstairs, and it's some techno thing or something, and I don't know how they found me or. But anyway, it was a track on this Rhino Records compilation. But that was right around the same time I'd started working with and recording for Instinct.
Got it.
And then so the prototype 909 in September of 93 was probably the first.
Okay. One of the things that you're known for is doing collaborations, and when anybody looks up your name and your work, what they also see is they see an amazing list of collaborators that you've worked with, and it sounds like even going all the way back to high school, collaboration was kind of a thing that was useful to
Yeah.
you, or was the way you preferred working. Uh, is that still the case, or has that sort of always been the case? And what is about
Yeah.
collaboration that is motivating to you?
There's a few things. I mean, yeah, I love collaborating, and I can't say whether I like it more or less than solo work. I find them very, very different. Solo work for me is really looking inward, and collaborations for me are about documenting a time and place, when it happened and who I was with. Yeah, I love collaborating because I love being with my friends and I learn so much from it. You get someone into the studio and they can go to a piece of your equipment that you've had for 10 years and do something completely different with it. It's like,
Right.
or you have a sound on a keyboard that you made and they start playing with it and you're like, I didn't design it to be played that way, but it's that whole fresh perspective and
Sure.
in watching what someone else does and it's such a learning experience, I think, for the people involved. And also I'm on a slightly less serious but still serious note, I'm extremely insecure when it comes to my music. I can't listen to it as soon as it's done. When I submit an album to be manufactured, the last listen to the master, or whatever, is the last time I listen to it for minimum of 2 or 3 years, if not five or more.
Wow. Okay.
Even when it comes out, when it comes back, like in the house right now, I have test pressings for this LP coming out, and I'm like, so don't want to listen to them, but I have to because the
Right.
label's waiting for me to approve them.
Sure.
But when I listen to my music, I usually just end up hating it.
Oh
And
man.
it's upsetting, because it's like I put all this time into it and I can't even listen to it. I don't really question why I put all this time into it for, what am I writing for nothing? No, but I'm just really insecure. I'll listen to it and I'll just hear the problems, you
Right.
know.
Right.
And this just came up it just came up on Twitter because someone posted something about a remix I did for the band Isan 10 years ago that I'd completely forgotten about.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, yeah, I remember doing that remix. So I checked out the link and I listened to it and I had no recollection of writing it. I mean, I remember when I was, when they asked me to do it, but I don't
Sure.
remember what equipment I listening to it. I was like, I don't remember how I did it.
Wow.
And it's only at that point can I begin to enjoy it.
Interesting.
Because when I listen to my music, all I hear is the process.
What is your working process? I mean, do you do stuff really live oriented, or do you labor over a DAW? And if you do, how does that not ever happen while you're in the middle of a DAW session?
Oh, it happens all the time. I
Oh,
mean, I've had
okay. All right.
Yeah, I mean, I had an album for going on 2 years now that's been finished to release. This was going on in the middle of last year quite a bit. I'd listen to it and I'd say, oh, it's not bad. It's not bad. I think it's ready. And then I'd get busy or something. And a couple weeks later, I'd put it on again to get it ready. And I'd be like, this is absolute crap. I can't
Mm-hmm.
release it. And then so I'd get upset, put it away again. And just if I harp on it too long, I really start to dislike the material.
So, like when you're in the heat of battle, you're not thinking about it, so you can like persevere. But
Well, because I love the process. It's like
oh, sure.
and I won't finish a song or continue a song if I'm not really enjoying it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what it is that's, I can sit back and listen to like an almost finished song and I'm like, oh, it's really nice. It's really nice. And then if I listen to it again or a couple months later, I may hate it. Like, what was I thinking?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure who to believe. Do I believe the guy who was making it or do I believe the guy who's listening to it? It's like, and should I even worry? Do we care about why am I worried? Am I worried because I think that no one else is going to like it? And should I care if people don't like it or not? Am I writing for me or am I writing for you? And
Right.
those kind of things go through my head all the time. But so
Interesting.
this was a long-winded answer, a long-winded lead into another reason I love collaborating is because there's someone else in the room I can blame. So if I don't like it,
it's not
and
just your fault, right?
it's not just my fault, but it is like, but in a more serious way, it's like there's someone else there and they're liking it. So it's a little bit of, reassurance that, okay,
Yeah.
this is when you're just by
Validation,
yourself, you
right?
have,
Yeah.
it's validation. You have no one else but yourself and whatever mood you're in that day to bounce it off of. And when there's someone else, they'll tell you if they don't like it. I'll say if I don't like it, and when we're both liking it, yeah, it's validated that it's something good. And the last part is just like capturing the moment. I prefer collaborating in person,
Mm-hmm.
whenever possible. It's so easy to collaborate remotely in the last 10 years or whatever, but I much prefer having a friend fly out or something and just 3 or 4 days and, hike in the woods and this
Yeah.
and that. And
The
then,
remote collaboration isn't very satisfying some way, right?
yeah, and I've done plenty. And I did this last year, I guess now, the album I did with Federico Duran under the name This Valley of Old Mountains.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's down in Argentina and I'm up here, and we tried the last couple of years to get us together, but it always just fell through. And then, of course, in 2020, it completely fell through. So we had no real choice, and that's fine. If we can't get together, then it's amazing that we are still able to collaborate. But it's much more fun in person.
Right.
Like the album I did with my friend Corey Fuller, who lives in Tokyo under the name Ohio was the band name.
Mm-hmm.
That album took us 4 years to do because we would not do it remotely. He would come to New York enough and I'd go to Tokyo enough that we'd have time to do it, but it did take a long time and was better for it, I think.
Sure, sure. Now, my listeners are going to, each one of them is going to have a collaboration that they will wish I would talk to you about. And, there's no end of options, but there's one that's actually really particularly interesting to me, and that's the collaboration that goes under the name ARC,
Mm-hmm.
which is it's funny because sometimes I see it described as like dark techno, but to me, it just sounds like an interesting version of Berlin School
Mm-hmm.
electronic music. But whatever it is, and maybe it's supposed to defy genre boundaries, that's fine. I just find it really incredible. I was actually really surprised, though, to hear that you were involved in that. I was a fan long before I knew it was your work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about how that got. That's a collaboration with I can't remember the name right now.
That's good with my friend Savas.
Yeah, and how did that get started? How did you decide on doing that kind of music? Was it just something that happened automatically, or did you specifically say, "I want to do this stuff. I want to find a collaborator that is interested in this kind of thing"? And how much was the music that you made an intention to make that music?
It was pretty intentional. That album came out back in '96, I
Mm-hmm.
think. Something, and the title of the album is 12K, and that was where I got the name for the label. And Savas was a fellow recording artist on Instinct under the name Omicron, and he and I had done enormous number of collaborations on the Instinct days. SETI, we had a weird lounge thing called Futique, and then Arc. This was sort of slightly pre-ambient days for us. Still deep in, but on the way out of my techno days.
Right. Okay.
And Savas and I mean, we'd known each other, see each other all the time. He lived in New York. We'd just write music all the time. that album's heavily influenced by Detroit techno. Whether it comes across or not, I don't know. It's been a while since I've listened to it, but we were both really listening to a lot of Detroit stuff. And I know Savas was probably, you mentioned the Berlin school. I think Savas was familiar with a lot of that stuff. If you're talking about like the classic Berlin school
Yeah,
stuff.
like Tangerine Dreamy kind of things. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not so familiar with that.
Okay.
I mean, I know obviously know the bands, but never really listened to them.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm pretty sure Savas did, but I can't speak exactly on that or how much that influenced him. But we actually started a record label, he and I, called Index Records, and we released one EP, and then it stopped. And it was a really cool EP, but it had an ARC song on it, which was the first one.
Okay.
And then we went on to do the full length album, which I think came out on KK Records in Belgium. We wrote that in Brooklyn. Yeah, I've always liked it. There's a couple songs in there that I've always really been proud of, but that was kind of where that one came from.
Sure, interesting. Now, one of the things that I would say is, or like a hallmark of your work or your body of work, your catalog, is that it's really, really varied. I mean, your solo stuff alone kind of takes a whole range from glitch experimental all the way to warm and oozing ambient. But your collaborations, you've done very melodic things, you've done serious techno things, you've done almost neoclassical things, I think, or it's again,
Yeah,
it's
and some
hard to
almost
put,
pop things as
and
well.
some almost
We've
pop
done
things, right?
vocals, yeah.
That normally is a death knell for an artist's work. Normally, the system kind of wants to make sure that you just like, you pick a track and you stay on your track and you don't get off the track.
Right.
You have like spurned that as an idea. Why, first of all? I mean, are you just unsatisfied working on a single thing? Do you love the variety of doing lots of different things? And how do you think that it affected your career?
I think my solo material, you probably sees a pretty gradual arc from the techno days to where it is now. If you line up the solo releases, you'll see a movement that probably doesn't isn't too jarring in any place. It's probably you could probably connect the dots pretty easily.
Sure.
And I think in that regard, it's just, I mean, we all change, our interests change and our tastes develop and ebb and flow. And I just want to write what I'm feeling at that point or what feels natural to me to write. In the early 90s, it was techno, and you get influenced by different things, and the whole glitch thing and the super, incredibly synthetic microsound music. And then, I move out of the city into the woods and my music starts getting more acoustic. And, I think there's dots to connect on that,
Sure.
and I think I've been doing this coming on 30 years. And I think if my record 30 years ago sounded like my record today, I think that would be a problem. you know,
Right. Yeah.
that being said, I really, sometimes I'm jealous of artists who can do one thing and stick to it. I don't know if jealous is the right word, but people get known for a sound. The most obvious is somebody like Autechre or Boards of Canada. Their band names have become adjectives practically,
Right.
for better or for worse. They're adjectives. They are genres in themselves.
They're descriptors. Yeah.
And there's something to be said about that. And there's a strength in that. But I think when you've been doing it as long as I have, you have to keep moving and evolving. I mean, it's just for a lot of reasons. I mean, my interest in technology and different equipment and instruments, and every album is a different process. And that's kind of what spawns the albums is I'm kind of reinventing the process every time.
I was going to ask how often is it that a new process spurs you into working on a new release?
Yeah, every day.
Yeah.
I mean, like all the time. I have a lot of equipment and I justify it. People talk about, the benefits of having a lot of equipment or having very little equipment. I do envy those that can do so much with so little. not to say I couldn't, but I'm so fascinated by the technology that I'm so fascinated by how a particular piece of equipment operates and makes it sound and how it can do what I want it to do, especially if it's not made for what I want it to do. So it's just, I can't be the guy with, a super minimal setup. I've given up trying to do that. I dream about it, let me sell everything and have
Right.
one console and one, this and then I'll just say, oh, it's just
Yeah.
not going to work. I
Right.
know myself too well. It's just not going to work. But it does lead to variation because every album focuses on a different small set of equipment, and that's going to lead to variation in the sound as well. And then collaborations, of course, are made to intentionally explore something different than what I'm doing usually. So when you talk about the varied sound of my output, collaborations, I mean, that's why I want to collaborate with somebody because they're going to bring something different
Something different to the
than what I
game.
usually
Right.
do.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Now, let's talk a little bit about the label 12K. You mentioned that you started a label Index and you put out one EP and then pulled the plug on that. At some point, you decided you wanted to get back in the label game again, and you kicked off 12K. What was the impetus behind that?
That was an album that I had ready called The Secret Number 12. I guess it was probably around 96 for Silent Records in California. It was an ambient label
Oh, I
doing some
remember. Yeah.
pretty cool stuff. West Coast ambient label. And I had the contract with them, and this was after Instinct. For some reason, the album, I don't remember now, but the album didn't happen. We had signed contracts and everything, and the album didn't happen. So I got a little upset about that, and I said, "Well, I'm just gonna do it myself." I had a label in the late '80s and very early '90s of industrial music cassettes in New York City. Now, by label, I mean a kid in his college dorm, like duplicating cassettes and
Right. Sending them off. Yeah.
Xeroxing flyers and stuff like that. But it was something I was doing when I was a late teenager, and then having worked at Instinct Records for a number of years as the art director and a one room office, one big kind of warehousey room where I could hear everyone talking. And after sitting there for 3 or 4 years listening to that, you kind of know how to run a label.
Sure.
And I had a musical following at that point, so I just decided to do it myself, and I knew it wasn't going to be very big, and it was never my intention to have it be big and have employees and stuff like that. It was always just something I wanted to do by myself. So
Mm-hmm.
I released that album as the first 12K release, and it took a couple years of just releasing me and some friends and stuff like that until it kind of worked into branching out to other artists around the world. But yeah, and doing it ever since, keeping it small.
Was it ever big enough that you had like employees? And
No,
I mean, it seemed to
no.
have a big footprint, at least psychic footprint. You
Yeah, I
know.
mean that's kind of the one thing I'm kind of proud of is that I think the reach or the impact of the label
Yeah.
has been far greater than the sales or the numbers or anything has ever been. And to me that's more important. I want to release great music and I want people to enjoy it, and that's the most important thing to me. It's a little tricky when you're dealing with other artists' music, because you do have to kind of hope that you can earn them some money and stuff like that. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
all just reach and no sales, but all the artists on board or that I work with are on board with the concept, and it's small, and I never wanted to be big. Just kind of keep quiet.
Yeah, well, when you started the label, though, that was a time when pressing CDs and shipping CDs to stores was kind of a thing. The label world now is a completely different thing.
Yeah,
What is the relevance of a label like 12K today?
I think it's a curatorial role. I think more so now than even maybe 5 years ago because of places like Bandcamp. That curatorial aspect becomes 12K will get a certain number of visitors or listeners or followers and have a certain mailing list size that some artists on their own may not have.
Right.
And so to kind of get into that ecosystem, I think helps.
Sure.
And it's not hard. I mean, anybody can be on Bandcamp and anybody can get their music on Spotify and iTunes. But, labels become trusted. And I've always kind of wanted 12K to be that way, where it's just kind of a trusted source for music that you like. If you like one thing on the label, you're probably going to like this other thing as well. So it's just really, it's become a family for me too. I mean, the artists, we're all dear friends and kindred spirits, and it's really, if I had my way, we'd all be living on some modernist commune somewhere, making music, making music together all day long, because it really is a kind of a family for me, all these people.
That's a cool vibe. Unfortunately, our time is just about up, but before I let you go, there's actually something, you've mentioned it a couple of times now, and I want to just talk to it specifically. You've talked a number of times about having moved, quote, up here, which is, and you imply that it's in the sticks somewhere. Where roughly are you, and what caused you to move out of New York? It sounded like New York was the place you wanted to be until apparently it wasn't. So
until you have children. Yeah, I mean, I love New York. I've always been an East Coast person. New York City is just, I felt that's where I needed to be to start the kind of career that I wanted. And I was probably right there, because I ran into the head of Instinct Records at a record store and happened to have a demo in my pocket, and that's just not going to happen everywhere.
In Poughkeepsie, right.
Yeah. So, but after 17 years in New York City, my wife and I we had a 2-year-old at the time and starting to think ahead to schools and this and that, and didn't really want to go through the New York City school mess. And I was kind of, at that point, I was kind of just itching to get some space. And I grew up kind of in a semi-rural, semi-suburban town. Nature is always a big part of my life. I just wanted to get back. My wife was getting frustrated at apartment living. We had a noisy neighbor downstairs, all that stuff. But we didn't want to be far from New York City, so we're an hour or so north in Westchester County, and we live in a very small town of 4,000 or 5,000 people, and a lot of trees and deers and coyotes, and took a little getting used to, but really love it, And I was always wondering how it would change my music, and I think it did. I always said to myself that when I lived in Brooklyn, I was making quiet music as an escape from the noise of the city. And if I moved into the quiet, would I start making noisy music to escape the quiet of the woods? But it wasn't the case. It just went deeper.
Sure.
But yeah, I couldn't live in a city again, I don't think, having a studio separate from the house and all the things that you just can't do in the city.
Right. Well, Taylor, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to have the discussion. It was really fabulous to get a chance to talk with you and learn more about your background and stuff. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It was really fun for me.
All right. Well, with that, I'm going to let you go. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Right, bye. Many thanks to Taylor for having a great chat. It's really cool to catch up with him. Man, he and I have been exchanging emails for years and years, and it was really great to get a chance to have a talk with him, to learn a lot more about his background, learn a little bit about how he approaches his work. Very cool stuff. I want to thank you all for continuing to listen and for sharing. I really do appreciate it. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, drop me a line, ddg@darwingross.com. Darwin.gross@gmail, ddg@20objects, ddg@cycling74.com. Those will all work. And remember, please, if you can, drop over to Patreon. It's patreon.com/DarwinGross. And help support the podcast, or at least sign up for the subscription to the blog so you can continue to hear what I have to say as I'm rambling my way through the week. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you again soon. Bye.